Welcome to RealTime Fantasy Sports. This is Starts, Sits, and Sleepers.
Hello and welcome to the RealTime Fantasy Sports Show. I'm Jeff Paur, Senior Editor at RealTime Fantasy Sports. On today's show, I'm going to give you my start, sits, and sleepers for the divisional round of the playoffs. A lot of you are still playing in some fantasy playoff leagues, or you're going to do DFS or pick'em games, over/under type stuff. So if you want to do any of that stuff, pay attention to this video and hopefully I can help you win some money for this week. So I'm going to give you just one at each position, quarterback, running back, receiver, and tight end for a start, sit, and sleeper because it's a division round and we have less players to pick from. So let's get started. I'm going to start with the starts at quarterback for the divisional round. First of all, I hope these games are as good as they were last week. They were absolutely tremendous last week. Kind of ended with a stinker game, Houston and Pittsburgh, but overall, games were unbelievable. A lot of big-time lead changes in the fourth quarter made for some great, entertaining football to watch. So I'm hoping it keeps up this week, and I think they could be some good games, so hopefully that keeps going. And as I mentioned, I'm going to start with the quarterbacks, and I'm going to start with the start, and it's Caleb Williams. I really like him this week, scored 28 fantasy points last week. He started slow in that game, but he had an unbelievable fourth quarter, led his team to a huge comeback victory. He made an unbelievable throw on fourth down to keep the game alive for the Bears, and he has 21 plus fantasy points, 4 or 5 games. I like him to have another big game this week against the Rams. I think it's going to be a high scoring game. Los Angeles has allowed 235 plus passing yards, 5 of 6 games. I think Williams is going to build on that fourth quarter and produce well for the Bears this week. My sit at quarterback, it's Bo Nix. So he led his team to the number 1 overall seed in the playoffs, had a solid overall season, but from a fantasy perspective, he was a little up and down. He scored just 11.95 fantasy points his last time out. He has less than 20 fantasy points, 2 of 5 games. And I think the Broncos are going to rely on the run a little more this week, exploiting a weakness in the Bills' defense. Bills have been very good against the pass this year, and especially lately. They allowed the 3rd fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks during the regular season. And of late, they've allowed fewer than 140 passing yards, 4 of 5 games. I think the passing defense has been a huge strength for the Bills this year, and I don't think Nix is going to have a very good showing in this one. My sleeper at quarterback, it's Sam Darnold of the Seattle Seahawks. So he did struggle in 2 games against the 49ers this season, but he's enjoyed some big games throughout the year. He's more than capable in this offense. He has 2 games with 30-plus fantasy points. He's had an extra week of rest compared to the other teams because they had that first round bye, Seattle. He's at home. He has some great weapons to work with in the passing game, and the 49ers have been kind of middle of the pack against the quarterback in terms of fantasy points allowed. They have allowed the 15th most fantasy points to quarterbacks during the regular season this year. I think Seattle's going to have some success offensively. San Francisco's still banged up defensively, and I like this passing game to do well this week in Seattle. All right, let's move on to the running back position, and I will go with my start at running back for the divisional round, and it's R.J. Harvey of the Denver Broncos. It took some time, but Harvey has really emerged as the clear lead back for the Broncos. He's found the end zone 5 of his last 6 games. He has double-digit fantasy points, all but one of those games as well. And as I mentioned earlier, because I didn't like Bo Nix this week, I actually think the Broncos are going to run the ball a lot in this favorable matchup. I think he's going to get a big workload as the number 1 back for the Broncos this week, R.J. Harvey. The Bills, they've allowed the 8th most fantasy points of running backs this year. They have allowed 150-plus rushing yards, 3 of 5 games. It's been an issue for them much of the year, and I like Harvey to do well in this divisional round. My sit at running back, it's James Cook of the Buffalo Bills. He's really kind of cool lately. He had a great overall season, but his last few games have not been great from a fantasy perspective. Fewer than 9 fantasy points, 3 straight games. So he got 15 carries last week. That was the positive. He had just 46 rushing yards on those carries, though. And he is in for another tough matchup against Denver this week. One of the best defenses in football, if not the best. And Denver's allowed fewer than 85 rushing yards 2 of their last 3 games and 3 of 5. I think the defense is going to give the Bills offense plenty of fits this week in Denver, and I think Cook could have another down showing in this divisional round. My sleeper at running back, it's kind of a theme. I got another Seattle Seahawk as a sleeper, and it's Zach Charbonnet. So I like the Seattle offense this week in this matchup against the 49ers. And Kenneth Walker, he gets much of the headlines in Seattle, but it's really turned into a timeshare at running back with Zach Charbonnet. Charbonnet has at least 17 carries, 2 straight games, 17 plus fantasy points, 3 straight. He's really producing consistent numbers. He scored a touchdown in each of his games against the 49ers this year. So I like him to find the end zone again this week. So maybe you want to put some money down on that anytime touchdown. I like that for Zach Charbonnet this week. And I think he's an intriguing fantasy play as well. I think he could keep it going, have another game with double-digit fantasy points. Let's move on to the receiver position for the divisional round. And my start is Devontae Adams of the Los Angeles Rams. He did fail to score a touchdown last week. That's been kind of his MO this year. He's been absolutely outstanding in the red zone, but he was healthy, returned from that hamstring injury, and he looked just fine in that matchup. 5 catches for 72 yards, and he tied a season high in targets last week with 13. That's another big time positive for him. I think he's going to get another big workload this week, because the Bears are going to do all they can to stop Puka Nacua, who's been absolutely outstanding. And the Bears have struggled against the pass as well. They allowed the 6th most fantasy points to receivers during the regular season. I think Adams is going to find the end zone in this matchup. So I think he's going to have a big game in this possible shootout in Chicago. My sit at receiver, it's Stephon Diggs of the Patriots. Diggs, he is the top receiver for the Patriots, but his production has really been erratic at times throughout the season, especially lately. He has just 5 catches for 59 yards on 8 targets his last 2 games. The opposition's really doing a good job of locking him down the last few weeks. I would not be surprised if that happens again this week against the Texans. A very good defense, very good secondary. They do a good job against the opposition's number 1 receiver. And like Denver, a great defense. Houston might actually have the best defense in football, slightly ahead of that Broncos defense, and they've allowed the 3rd fewest fantasy points to receivers during the regular season. So I think Diggs is going to struggle again this week. My sleeper at receiver, it is a Seahawk again. Shocking, right? Cooper Kupp. I like him this week. He hasn't had much of a season. His first in Seattle this year, been kind of more down than up. He does have double-digit fantasy points 4 times this year, though, and he has a track record of producing well in the playoffs. I like the Seahawks to have success offensively this week, I should say. And I think the 49ers are going to do all they can to take away Jackson Smith and the Jigba. So that's going to give Kupp some favorable matchups, some favorable coverages. So I think he could do well this week. 49ers, another team banged up in the secondary because of injuries. So I would not be surprised at all if Kupp has one of his better games of the season this week. Why not take a chance on him? He has a track record. He's been one of the top receivers in the game throughout his career. So I think he's more than capable of the big game this week. All right, let's move on to the tight end position. My start there, it is Hunter Henry of the New England Patriots. Touchdowns, 3 of his last 4 games, had 3 catches for 64 yards and a score last week on 5 targets against a very good Chargers secondary. He has double-digit fantasy points 4 straight games and 6 of 7. He was a little erratic early in the year, Hunter Henry, from a fantasy perspective, been much more consistent recently, though. That's very good news for his fantasy owners, and I think he's going to do well again this week against Houston. Very good defense in Houston, but I think Henry could get some favorable matchups in this one, and Drake May could lean his way a little bit when he wants to get rid of the ball quickly and get it out to his tight end to try to negate that great Houston pass rush. My sit at tight end, it's Evan Ingram of the Denver Broncos. He has just 2 games all season with double-digit fantasy points. I don't think it's going to change this week. He didn't have near the season most hoped he would in Denver. A lot of people thought he was going to have another one of his big seasons. He's had several throughout his career, and a move to Denver was a good one. Get a chance to play that joker role in the offense, but hasn't really worked out for Ingram this year. Top 50 yards just 1 time all season. Now he gets the Bills in this playoff game. They've allowed the fewest fantasy points to tight ends this season, so don't look for a turnaround from Ingram this week. All right, my sleeper at tight end, it's Jake Tonges of the San Francisco 49ers. He gets his chance to start because George Kittle went down with that unfortunate Achilles injury. And Tongas has been pretty good this year when he's getting a chance to start for the 49ers. He has double-digit fantasy points 5 times this year. He's proved to be a reliable target at tight end. 49ers still have some injuries as well at receiver. Ricky Pearsall, who knows if he plays, and George Kittle's out, so Tongas is going to get some chances against Seattle. They've struggled at times to stop the tight end this year. They've allowed the 11th most fantasy points to tight ends on the season. And Tongas, he also found the end zone against the Seahawks in week 1. So I think Tongas could be a good play for fantasy teams this week. All right, those are my start, sits, and sleepers for the divisional round of the playoffs. Let's hope we get to see some great games again this week. And I hope you have a lot of success in all of your fantasy games in this divisional round. This has been Jeff Paur for RealTime Fantasy Sports. Have a great day.